How you doing, big fella?
I'm good, yeah, I'm good. Weather's good. Little bit of things loosening up a little bit, so long as we're careful. So, yeah, good.
And welcome all to part 2 in our series, Big Ron Remembers. Educated at Oxford, taught at Cambridge, and arguably the second greatest English manager in my lifetime, Ron Atkinson. Is that fair? Is that fair, Ron?
No, it's very unfair. Who would you say? Go on,
I'd say Brian Howard Clough.
Yeah.
And I would only put Cloughie ahead of you for what you've done in the game. Lots of people will say Don Revie and other managers. No, for me, Big Ron is the great, and you are the greatest living manager.
You've got that wrong. I thought you said Don Revie did manage England.
No, I'm on about English managers. I would love to have seen you manage England, Ron, because I think you would be an absolute perfect choice, because your philosophy of football was keeping the ball on the deck, playing it on the carpet, like arguably the greatest coach, Jimmy Hogan, who we're going to be talking about, who taught you when you was a kid at Aston Villa. So first and foremostly, your first memories of Jimmy Hogan, and were you aware of what Jimmy had done beforehand when you met him?
A little bit, I mean, the history of fact, he'd sort of been manager of Celtic before the war, and then he comes to Aston Villa, and from I think I'm right in saying, did he get a promotion or something?
Yes, he did.
I think, yeah, he got Villa promoted in the 30s. During the war, he went off, and he later on went and coached a lot of the European nations, which we didn't know an awful lot about at the time. And it really first came to light when in 52, 53, first Austria came to Wembley and done a dazzling display. England drew 2-2 with them. And then, 12 months later, probably 12 months later, the Hungarians came to Wembley and absolutely destroyed us, and destroyed a good England side, by the way, with the type of football we could only dream of. I always remember watching it on television. There weren't a lot of television games. And before the kick-off, they'd done the thing, and Puskas went to the centre circle, rolled the ball, flicked it up in the air, and caught it on his instep. And the game hadn't started, and we all went. I remember some of the lads being with him, and we all went, what has he just done? I mean, it's a little bit of a standard trick now, but we'd never seen it before. And then they scored straight from the kick-off, and subsequently gave a display that was, I would still rate that Hungarian side as good as any side, certainly as good as any international side. Brazil in 70, maybe Holland in the late 70s, although they didn't win the major one. And then, I joined Aston Villa as a kid, and Jimmy Hogan had just come to Aston Villa. His job was to coach the youngsters, and it was a pleasure, really. We would play in Aston Villa then had 17, and the third team played in a league which was the Birmingham League, hard league. We played against a lot of established or ex-pros on the way down, but still got plenty to offer in terms of know-how and experience. And that was Jimmy Hogan's team, the third team. And to this day, I can remember how he went about his team. The Hungarians, incidentally, nicknamed him Uncle Jimmy. That was that, or say the Hungarians, he was known as that on the continent. And what he did, he would have you before the game, and his way of explaining it, never heard him ever heard Jimmy, or Mr. Hogan, as we used to call him, swear. And his philosophy was, if you had the ball, wherever you had the ball on the field, you were attacking. If the opposition had the ball on the field, you were defending. And he had a way of putting it. He used to say, like in those days, the midfield players were wing halves. And he'd say to the wing halves, you've got to be like waiters in a restaurant. You've got to serve the forwards. And he actually, as well, one of the things that, teams do nowadays, and I don't remember anybody ever doing it before. We used to do it as kids, in the kids, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. He used to have that team huddle before a game. Yeah, he used to have that. Now, I mean, I did many, many years later before one or two teams started adapting that. But he used to have that, and everybody, I know lads I know lads, I'm not too sure, I haven't done it myself, who deliberately would opt out of playing in the reserve team, the Central League side, to play in Jimmy's team. That is a fact, actually, because it was quite funny. I mean, I used to laugh at it at the time. Jimmy would be giving it all his philosophy about pass, play, pass, control, pass. All his training methods were all done. This was in the days when most clubs, including Wolves, who had an experience of what Wolves were like, they were with Man U, the best two teams in the country. Wolves put a big emphasis on physical running and
Yep.
powering, with great players. But Jimmy never did. I don't ever remember doing a training session ever with Jimmy Hogan where you didn't have a ball at you. You'd be working up and down we used to do a lot of stuff in the car park at Villa Park, which was a hard surface, and you'd be working, he'd get you to take the ball up the field inside, outside your right foot, inside, outside your left foot. You'd be doing it into little passing sequences, follow your pass, which I've now seen at many clubs. It's in many ways a standard training procedure now, but that was new then. Jimmy would go follow your pass, play and pass, play and pass. And but after all that, and it really was and you're going back years, it was a pleasure to play his team. You get in the reserves, and this is where the irony came in. And the Central League the Central League team would be a couple of young players and some of the older players that weren't in the first team and whatever. And the trainer, we used to have a trainer with a cloth cap, the old cloth cap trainer, and his standard line, because he was always cracking jokes, the trainer in the reserve team, but his standard line was, forget what Tip Taps told you, give it some altitude, which was very disrespectful, really. And amongst the lads used to go, what about that? But because Jimmy was, his way of coaching and training and that was totally different, I would guess, to virtually anybody else in the game. Later on, I think it was Jackie Mansell who played for Portsmouth. He went to Holland and coached. He took a lot of that stuff over. I know for a fact Malcolm Allison took a lot of his stuff on board. Yeah. And that's what it was. He laid a print down for one or two of the people that all of a sudden wanted to be coached to take on board. We heard later years, around about the early 60s, that the West Ham Academy produced an awful lot of coaches, Malcolm, Bundy, people like that, Ron Greenwood, John Lyle and all that. But I'll tell you what, I think he would have laid a lot of the foundation that they followed.
Wholeheartedly agree. I've just read the book Prophet or Traitor, and we're going to dip into Jimmy's career. But you're absolutely spot on, Ron, with everything that you've referenced with Jimmy, because that's what comes out of that book while I'm reading it. He also introduced a smaller ball to training sessions as well. So it says in the book, which again is years ahead of anything that anybody was doing at the time, and the authorities were trying to coach it. Well, I'm saying trying to coach. I mean, England were training in a certain way, and Jimmy was really, steering against the tide, and unfortunately in this country he wasn't respected so much by, it appeared, the senior players and the authorities, and as a consequence had to keep going over to the continent and showing them how to play football. But what we're just talking about, the Villa in 1957, Aston Villa got to the FA Cup final. And you could argue that Jimmy was a massive influence on the influx of young players, and certainly Peter McParland that scored the two goals in that cup final, couldn't you?
Well, I'm just thinking you said that. Peter would be the only other of the team that played in the cup final. In all fairness, probably the only people that came into contact with it would have been Peter when he first came over from Dundalk. Stan Crowther to a lesser. Stan Crowther was a local lad from Tipton, Bilston, that area, who'd come through and played. He'd have played in the 80s. So, but the rest of them were sort of established pros, come from elsewhere. But yes, you certainly would be right with Peter. He would have had some of the benefit of Jimmy's coaching. What you didn't, the senior players they didn't really get a chance. I don't recall many sessions, if any, where the senior players worked with me.
Yeah.
Jimmy was primarily to coach I would say the 17, 18, 19, which was, the Birmingham League team.
Yeah,
But
Reading.
and the other thing I can't remember any player of that group ever kicking over the traces with him or whatever. I can't ever remember him having a fallout with any of the players of that group. Because we all respected what he was doing, and I'd had it to be elsewhere before. I spent a little bit of time at Molyneux, and nothing against Molyneux. They were great in the day. They were a magnificent team. Wolves, as I say, they were the forerunners of European football.
Yep.
But certainly in England anyway. But Jimmy had this way. In fact, one of the things I did, Jimmy, the best coach I've ever or actually seen at senior level was Dave Sexton. And now when I went, I actually bought Dave. He was a bit of a loose end. He was living in Coventry, Kenilworth, and I brought him in to work, not to work with the younger players, not to coach a team or anything like that, but just to coach players. And maybe that was a little bit of a thing back from when Jimmy came to the Villa. But Jimmy had been a big man at the Villa before the war. As I say, promotion. He got one or two legendary players. There's a guy, George Cummings. A lot of people might say was probably the greatest. They reckon he's the only fella that Stanley Matthews want to play against. He got him there and coached him. So, he had his big Villa. And then as well, I suppose Jimmy would be in his 60s or something when he came back to the Villa. He might 70s. Have been even older.
Yeah, he was in his 70s,
yeah. Yeah. And, he was every day you were training, he was there. I'm not a training enthusiastic and everything. Yeah.
He carried on coaching at Aston Villa until he was 76.
Did he really?
Which is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he was a coach that he demonstrated things like you've alluded to earlier. Now, he'd show players how to do things. A little bit like when we've spoken before, when you'd have training sessions and you'd say to a player, go and show me a lollipop, go and show me this, and things like that. I'm guessing, Ron, you took from Jimmy. And how much of your career as a coach and a manager did Jimmy influence you?
Well, you don't know these things. I mean, I've done sessions and put sessions on and whatever. I'm doing that because that was something that I was, that was put on me as a train. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny little thing. I once went to Holland to watch 20th Day. I went to watch Franz Tyson before he went to it. And I'm watching, and I saw him do a trick. He ran over the ball one way, came back the other. And that was a training. I thought, that's what Jimmy Hogan used to get us doing in training. I never had the ability or the courage to do it in a match. But the thing that struck me with Frank Tyson. And then when he went to Ipswich later on, I noticed it a few times where he stepped over the ball and came back out the other way. And that was one of the training things Jimmy Hogan used to put on us, yeah.
Because when you look at Jimmy's career, Jimmy was a player at certainly at Bolton at the time when he went and played in Holland and was so influenced. I think they won 10-2, and he actually, reading the book, he kind of felt sorry for the Dutch players and says, look, one day I'll come back and I'll teach you how to play football. Well, that was his first coaching job at Dordrecht in Holland. He also managed the Dutch national team in the I think it was 1912 to their first defeat of Germany. They beat Germany. It was Germany in them days, not West Germany, of course. But they beat them 2-1. And Jimmy was there in Holland. He's then coming back. He's gone back out and he's teaching in Austria. And then in 1914, just before the outbreak of the war, Jimmy is then interned and he's imprisoned. And it was only a couple of brothers that got Jimmy out, and he was in his back garden working away and teaching the kids how to play football and doing one or two little jobs. And then when he was released, so a little bit later, I think it was a couple of years later, he was told he was going home, and he was dropped off at the Hungarian border, and that's where the connection with Hungary and Jimmy Hogan began at MTK, and he had a massive influence in Dutch football. He certainly then had a massive influence on Hungarian football, and then he went over in Germany and influenced them. In the year that he died, 1974, aged 91, the general secretary of the German FA wrote to his son Frank and says, in many ways, your father is the is is the guy that taught us how to play football. So what you're seeing now in Germany as well are the fruits of the labours of Jimmy Hogan.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah,
It is
I know,
incredible,
I
Ron,
know,
when you
I
look in
know.
his career.
I mean, the thing that struck me, and I was only a kid at the time, but the thing that struck me was the reverence of the Hungarians.
Yeah,
How much, how much. And Jimmy had never spoken about it. Yet I don't ever remember Jimmy Hogan ever saying to us, "Oh, this lad Puskas, I had him," and whatever. I don't ever remember him making any reference himself to
yeah,
what he'd done in the past.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden, these articles started appearing in the paper where they're talking for Uncle Jimmy, as
Mm,
they call him, and Puskas, who is without a doubt one of the greatest players ever played the game. He spoke in glowing terms.
yeah.
And you think, well, it's a bit of a recommendation, that.
Well, it is. I mean, a couple of quotes. The ball is round and it's meant to go round the team. Play it simple and make it quick. Also, when he was coaching the young players, he'd say, have you ever tried to open a tin of peas from the middle? You can't. You open it from the outside, and that's how you play football. Some of the thing, it was just light years ahead of anything. And he played in a game against Steve Bloomer. It was Bolton versus Borough.
Yeah.
And he looked at that day. Bloomer was taking a penalty, and I think they won 2-1. But he looked that day, and he looked at the conditions, and it said in the book that not only do you play the 11 players, you play the conditions as well. So whenever the team was going to toss up, Jimmy would study the ground where he was playing, and he'd look at the position of the sun, and he'd tell his captain to either kick or against it to get the maximum of the conditions and the elements as well. So he was always ahead of the game.
Yeah, attention to detail.
Absolutely, Ron.
Yeah.
Everything attention to detail. Some of the players that he's either managed, coached, or certainly had an influence, but I'm just going to go coached and managed. In goal, the Rudy Heaton from the wonder team of the 30s of Austria. I've put you there as right back, Ron.
I don't want to be right back. I
I,
can't play
I know
right
you
back.
can't run, but when you look at the players in front of you, you've got George Cummings as another. You've got Clockwork Ostwork, who was the number 5.
Well, I'd have been happy if you dropped him and put me in his place. Yeah,
Georgie
yeah.
Orth, I'm playing as a kind of wing half, and Walter Notion. And apologies if I don't get the pronunciation right, but it's just from reading the book. Emre Schlosser is in midfield with another one, Orth, a winger. Joseph Braun, who's another winger. You got Richard Hoffman, who was the first player to score a hat-trick against England, who was a foreigner when we drawed 3-3 against Germany in 1930. You got Matthias Sindelar, kind of like left inside forward, and a right inside forward, Alfred Schaefer. And I tell you what, when you look at these players and you look at the influence, they're absolute legends of association football, and many of them before the Magic Maggies that he taught how to play football, literally, and also from that wonder team of the 30s in Austria with Hugo Meisel, who arguably were second greatest team of all behind the Maggies.
Well, I'm just pleased that I'm in instead of Puskas.
Well, I thought you'd like that, Ron.
Yeah.
But he loved wingers as well, didn't he? And he kind of looked at the way that the Scottish inside forwards played and blended everything into that melting pot to almost make, his philosophy something different from others. And reading the book, he got his philosophy when he was at Fulham as a player, and
Yeah.
that's where the Scottish influence come from, because there was a lot of Scottish players at Fulham at the time.
Yeah.
He also was on a coaching course that he attended in 1946. It was a 15-day coaching course in France, and it was the most intense course that he ever attended. And many of the coaches were there in Northern Africa, and Jimmy referenced the Tunisian players as some of the most skillful that he'd ever seen play football.
Yeah.
So he almost prophesied that the North Africans would rise up and be influential in football. And you look at some of the players in the Premier League today, some of those players from Northern Africa have been doing that. And it was Gabriel Hanot, who was the football editor of L'Equipe, who was later then the founder of the European Cup. Again, the connection with Wolves and Honved and Jimmy Hogan, and I guess in a nutshell, everything that we see today, where we look at Pep
Yeah.
Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp and that, everything that we see, you can trace it back to Jimmy Hogan, and Jimmy Hogan's influence in football should never be underestimated, because he was, in his words, the number one football coach, and he was, but again, never recognised by the authorities in this country, but absolutely loved abroad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was, that's sometimes. I mean, you had a prime example later on,
Yeah,
with people like George Rayner, who went out to
absolutely.
Sweden, took them to a World Cup final and so
Yeah,
forth. And I think the other one was Jesse Carver. These were people that went out and, because we were very insular at the time.
yes,
We thought, it's like I said, we thought we thought international football was us, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland,
yeah.
and the Republic. We didn't, all right, occasionally these other teams would pop up and so forth. But I mean, I think 53 was the first time any side had come to England and won, hadn't they? But
Yes. Yeah.
anybody from outside the home nations, the Republic, I think, got a result at Everton in 1950, but none of the other teams. I mean, even the Austrian team that came, that was a 2-2 draw or something.
Yeah.
2-2 draw, I think.
Yeah, it was.
And and we go to a World Cup, and we get beat by America or the US of A.
But again, I mean, in part three, we're going to be touching upon and looking into the career of the great Neil Franklin, who didn't go to that World Cup, which was England's first in 1950. He went
Yeah.
to the El Dorado League in Colombia and plied his trade there. And lots of people have referenced Neil and have argued that if Neil Franklin would have been there, it may have been a little bit different, because again, another player that was absolutely world class and above his years, wasn't he, Ron?
Well, he was. I mean, he was. In the modern game where at one time the centre half had to be somebody that headed, kicked, cleared, and booted centre forwards and whatever. Then over the last few years, all of a sudden, in fact, in many ways, overplay. You're getting central defenders who the first prerequisite is to be able to play on the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, I once had a discussion with another well-known manager, and I recommended a player to him. The player, sadly enough, was Hugo Ekihog.
Yeah.
And his comment to me was, "Can he come out with the ball?" And I said, "Yeah. Every time he tackles, he comes out with the ball." And then he gives it to good players. That's his first job. But Neil Franklin, as you say, was a footballing centre half. And when I used to first look at the England team it was a given that the half-back line, as it was in those days, was Wright, Franklin, and Dickinson.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be the same week in a week out, because they probably only played 5 internationals a year.
Mm.
But I'm just thinking who played centre half in 50. It wasn't Harry Clark of Spurs, was it?
I'll be honest, I'm not 100% certain. I don't know who took Neil Franklin's place, but whoever did, I'm guessing it wasn't as good.
No, Harry Johnson got a lot of caps, the Blackpool captain. He got a lot of central defence. Sid Owen got 1 or 2. But I can't recall. Harry Clark played once or twice. He played in the Spurs team that won second and first divisions. No, but Neil Franklin was, he was a certainty to have gone. And the irony was he was only out in, Bogota? He was only out there for 2 months, couple of months.
6 games, yeah.
And then comes back and was cold shoulder when he came back out and finished up playing second division, I think, for probably Rage Carter or somebody at Hull City. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And just in summing up, the way that Jimmy was treated, and guys, this is a fantastic book, Prophet or Traitor, the Jimmy Hogan story, and this part in the book was so. I looked at it and just thought it just seemed as though this was just typical of the way Jimmy was treated. When he returned after the First World War, because he was out there coaching in Hungary, and that's why many in this country perceived him to be the traitor, because obviously Hungary were on the side of Germany, but again, that's political. But Jimmy didn't get involved in any politics. All he wanted to do was coach football. So when he went back to the FA to apply for a special help fund, the General Secretary, or the head of the English FA at that time, Frederick Wall, threw him 3 pairs of khaki socks and said, "We send those to the boys in the front line. They'd be grateful of that." Sent Jimmy away with nothing. But when Jimmy left Hungary, he had a cigarette lighter with the inscription on it, "To our dearest Baski, with best wishes, your thankful MTK players." And I think in summing up, Jimmy Hogan was absolutely loved, honoured and treasured by everybody that come across him, particularly those abroad, but by the English authorities, because they didn't like the way he coached. He was, his name was blacklisted pretty much, Ron. And he didn't get the jobs that he should have in England.
Yeah, you may be right. I mean, because I thought he'd been bought to the Villa, as I say, because he was a big name at the Villa before the war, and I thought he came there. I never got the impression from him that he had aspirations then to do anything else but coach the young lads.
Yeah. And it was Eric Houghton, wasn't it, that brought him back to Aston Villa, coming back for full circle?
Him. Yeah, Eric could have played with him.
Yeah, he did.
I would guess.
And again, reading the book, Jimmy Hogan suggests that Aston Villa, the team that he had at Aston Villa and the team that he was building, and got to the 1937 FA Cup semi-final when they got beat by Preston, as one of the greatest teams that he was ever in command of. So, you know, it was kind of unfinished work at Aston Villa, and what a shame that they did let him go. And, you know, I guess the war years got in the way of Jimmy and so many great players. For instance, Bill Shankly, that played in the he probably would have played in that semi-final, because definitely played in the final in 1938 when Preston beat Huddersfield 1-0.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a very fair point. That the war years probably, if it hadn't been for that, probably Jimmy Hogan may not have even gone abroad. He may have stayed in a top job here.
Absolutely. Well, who knows? Because we will never know. But all we can ever do is remember former greats that gave us, well, just left an indelible mark on our game that we love, and a philosophy that coaches and managers like you, Ron, produce great teams and great players, and kept on Jimmy's work. So, You know, it is Thursday and it's Thankful Thursday and everybody's going out and giving the NHS a clap. So from every football fan, Ron, can I give you a big clap because, like I said at the beginning, you are, in my opinion, the
Yeah,
second greatest
but
manager.
you've missed one thing out.
Go on, Ron, what's that? Sorry, what?
Jimmy Hogan. I always got the impression that Jimmy Hogan
Yeah,
was a very contented person.
yes,
I never got the impression
yeah.
that, oh, right, we were kids, so we didn't look at those things really. But he always seemed a very, very cheerful person that was happy with his lot.
Because he loved what he did. He followed his beliefs, and whether people liked him or loathed him or gave him jobs or not, Jimmy just stuck to his principles and
Yeah.
just believed in that. And I think that is a great mark and character of any person in life, no matter what they do. And in part three, Ron, we're going to be looking at Neil Franklin, but I do want to do one in between. I want to do your best Aston Villa 11 because, again, Villa fans of a certain age will look at Ron Atkinson and say, the greatest manager that we've had at Aston Villa. Sheffield Wednesday supporters will also say the same. So will West Bromwich Albion, and so will Atletico Madrid, and so will Manchester United as well, because you've done it with many, many teams. So I'd like to remember some of the great achievements that you've had in football over the years, Ron, as well.
Yeah, but the thing is, I've always said it was a lot better than work.
Absolutely. You've never worked a day in your life, have you? I remember
No.
that from that first one that we did.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolute top value again, as always, Ron. Can I thank you for your time and
yeah,
thank
no,
everybody for listening? So till next time,
yeah.
thank you very much, sir,
Okay.
and get thinking of your best Villa 11, Ron. 'Cause I'm